Welcome to Resting Places Learning Spaces, the podcast where we explore cemeteries, memorial spaces, and more, and the lessons they hold for history, memory, and education. I'm Dr. Hilary Van Dyke, and today we're venturing into one of the most iconic commemorative landscapes in the United States, the National Mall and Memorial Parks in Washington, D.C. This 2-mile stretch is more than just a gathering place for tourists. It's a living classroom where history unfolds through monuments, memorials, and civic engagement. We'll dive into its historical and cultural significance and discuss how educators can use this space to foster meaningful learning experiences in their classrooms. I was there earlier this month and was in DC to visit a friend, and also kind of ended up being like a writer's retreat I didn't realize I needed. Anyhow, I'm going to mix in some of the audio from that visit into this conversation today about the memorial malls. So first, I just want you to meet my friend who I did go to the mall with.
My name is D. Kwamboka Kariuki.
Cool. And where do you live?
I live right outside of Washington, D.C. in this here United States of America.
And how did we meet?
Well, do we have time for that? I met you, Hilary Van Dyke. Met you when you were the ambassador for Black Girls Run, Tampa. Remember those days?
Yeah.
Oh my God. And then, but we really got locked in. So during all of those running, we kiki. Then you invited me to your birthday party. Were you turning 28?
I think so.
You were turning 28, and we shared a bottle of birthday vodka, and the rest is history.
The rest is history.
Period.
The National Park Service calls the National Mall America's Front Yard, and it lies at the very center of the plan of the federal city. It encompasses the mall, which are the grounds from the U.S. Capitol to the Washington Monument. It also includes West Potomac Park, which is where you'll find the Lincoln Memorial, Jefferson Memorial, Vietnam Veterans Memorial, Korean War Veterans Memorial, World War II Memorial, and the FDR Memorial. And more, of course. But Pierre L'Enfant, he had a city plan in 1790 that featured a network of broad diagonal axes, the most important of which was Pennsylvania Avenue, which provides a direct link between the legislative and executive centers, which is the Capitol and the President's House. And then this kind of is supposed to represent this idea of the legislative and executive branches of government working together. L'Enfant also planned 2 avenues of public land, one extending south from the President's House, the other extending west from the Capitol. And these public lands are now parks that serve as the city's monumental core. Benjamin Banneker, who was one of the first official Black public servants, he surveyed the new land that was the new capital city, and his calculations were actually the ones that they used as a part of the L'Enfant plan. The design was influenced by Senator James McMillan as well, and McMillan, along with some architects, produced a report for the Senate Park Commission, which is called the McMillan Plan, and in that plan, they made recommendations in 1902 for improving the design and appearance of D.C. and this historic core. In 1915, the cornerstone for the Lincoln Memorial was set, and then this was completed and the dedication happened on May 30th, 1922.
Should I read that?
Yeah.
In this temple, as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever.
What do you think about that quote? What does it make you think about?
I feel like when it says, as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, and the way we are being treated out in these spaces is giving, is it white people he was saving it for?
Right.
About my people. But I'm just saying, like, how my people included, or like
in this. Okay, gotcha.
Just on, just what we have to deal with on a daily.
Based on history.
Yes, based on history.
Yeah.
And sometimes, honestly, it just makes me think about all the people that get the glory for things and get the credit for things.
Yeah, okay. I can see that. However, the construction for the mall, as far as how we know it today, was authorized by Congress in March 1929 and funded by the Public Works Administration during FDR's administration. So most of the construction for the mall, at least in the way that we see it and understand it, happened from 1932 to 1936. During the Jim Crow era, most Washington schools were segregated, similarly to the rest of the country, but the lore, at least the lore that we tell ourselves about the mall, is it was one of the places where all students were welcome to learn. While the mall's facilities were integrated, however, many social and recreational activities that did take place there were not. For example, there used to be a bathing beach from 1922 to 1925 at the Tidal Basin, and that bathing beach was only for white patrons. During FDR's presidency in the 1930s, the National Park Service began managing the mall, and America's national parks were desegregated under his presidency. This included all recreational facilities on the mall, including the tennis courts and golf course. In 1939, the Daughters of the American Revolution prevented Marian Anderson from performing at Constitution Hall, and so First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt and the NAACP arranged Anderson's concert to happen instead at the Lincoln Memorial, and they drew a huge crowd of integrated folks as well as millions of radio listeners hearing the concert. The mall has been used in other ways. I think most famously the 1963 March on Washington, where Dr. King spoke to a crowd of over 200,000 people calling for equal rights. And I think beyond these demonstrations, there's other ways that Black folks have had a pretty big, I would say, impact on the mall itself. Daryl McKissack is the president and CEO of McKissack and McKissack, which is the nation's oldest African-American architectural firm. She is the fifth generation of her family to work in this construction business, starting with her great-great-grandfather, Moses McKissack. He was an enslaved man who learned construction and passed on the skill to his children. And McKissack and McKissack led on the construction of many of the sites in the National Mall, and they actually were the architect on record for the MLK Memorial. That memorial is located in West Potomac Park at 1964 Independence Avenue, Southwest, and that address is referring to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 becoming law. The memorial's official dedication date was August 28th, 2011, which was the 48th anniversary of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. However, because of Hurricane Irene, the ceremony didn't actually happen until October 16th. Okay, so we're here at the Martin Luther King Memorial, and there's this big wall with all these quotes from Dr. King, and then it says like where he said it and what year he said it. So I think I want to look at this first quote because I feel like every time we hear it, it stops at the word everywhere. We don't get the whole quote. All right, so I'm going to ask you to read it again.
All right, well, it says, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." This is really deep. And back like, oh, that doesn't affect me, but
it does.
You know, everything affects everything.
Agreed.
Mic drop. Looks like
McKissack and McKissack also were one of the firms that helped in the construction of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And they also were helpful in renovations for the Jefferson and Lincoln memorials. In 1929 and 1933, the Smithsonian National Gallery of Art hosted temporary exhibits featuring African American artists. However, in the 60s, the gallery started to feature African American art permanently. And then Lonnie Bunch is the 14th secretary of the Smithsonian Institution and the first African-American person to hold this position. From 2005 to 2019, he steered the creation, construction, and launch of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which opened in 2016, and I lovingly call it the Blacksonian. And then I would say just another note, thinking about the history of the mall and how it has been a part of civil rights movements, or even just shows you the shifting tides of the civil rights that Black folks have. Now, personally, I've been to the Memorial Mall countless times. I think if I remember, the first time I went was with my family when I was like 16, I think. 12 or 16, I don't remember which year. However, we saw all the things, including the Memorial Mall. And really the only memory I have there was tourists who I didn't know wanted to take a picture of me in front of the FDR Memorial. Otherwise, basically anytime I'm in DC, I always go to the National Mall. I just really like to walk. I think you can get like 2 miles if you walk to every single memorial. But I just really enjoy looking at all of the structures. I think it's a fascinating thing as well to look at them because they're so beautiful and tell a lot of stories about America, but particularly just our like relationship to freedom over time and also who has access to freedom. So yeah, I just think it's a very fascinating set of memorials and they're just so beautiful. And particularly if you go during cherry blossom season, like there's really nothing like it. And then I would also say going at nighttime is also just a different way to see it, but equally beautiful as seeing it during the daytime. Now let's turn our attention to how teachers can bring the National Mall into their classrooms, whether in person or remotely. I have Michelle Anderson with me again. Does that like make you a co-host now? I feel like I'm like catfishing you into becoming my co-host.
I like the idea of being the returning expert.
I like it. All right, so some of the thoughts that I had with the National Park being a part of classes, I'll just kind of say all of mine and then I'll pass things over to you. The National Park Service offers interactive online tours of the mall, which allows students to explore the history and symbolism of each monument. I think with that, even if you can't like literally go to DC, you can still have students investigate like a specific memorial, its design, historical context, thinking about who's remembered, how are they remembered, who's left out of this memory. So I think you could use that to explore controversies around certain memorials to spark critical thinking. And then even having students question or wonder, should new monuments be added? And then how do we teach and handle historical figures with complex legacies? Or you can think about having students analyze speeches, letters, protest movements that took place at the mall and writing reflections about their significance or relevance today. And then I think the last thing with all these ideas is just for everyone to remember that I just don't think there's a way you can teach these memorials without recognizing that there will be challenges with students bringing like diverse perspectives about some of the topics or even just having like deeply emotional reactions to them. So with all of those ideas, always remembering that we have to create a respectful classroom environment where diverse viewpoints can be explored thoughtfully. All right, so first I'm gonna ask, what are your thoughts about all that?
So I love all of that. I love using monuments to teach history because you're connecting both what students are learning about those individuals or those events, but you're connecting it to how people are choosing to remember them and how they're choosing to represent what they are memorializing. Mm-hmm. So whether that is because it was an individual that was particularly significant and that people feel that this is something that future generations need to know about, need to remember, need to, just have in their consciousness, but it's also the people that are creating them are choosing how those monuments look. So you should be recognizing it is an interpretation. Mm-hmm. And so that is where it becomes really fertile ground in a classroom to talk about interpretation and to talk about how we are selecting the things that we want to memorialize. What are the qualifications for something to be memorialized? So it's really rich ground to have and to be using those historical thinking skills of context.
Right.
But then also the sourcing, right? Who created this monument and why did they make the choices that they did? Everything that is on a monument or in a seal or in a whatever, they were purposefully chosen to be there. And that is all worth really great discussion time in a classroom.
Okay. All right, so one thing I do think I remember is that American symbolism is a part of the standards that students learn. I feel like I'm thinking it's elementary though, even though I'm like more focused on secondary. I'm still curious like how you've recommended teachers talk about that American symbolism or how you've seen it done, but specifically when we're thinking about these things on the mall.
So I have a couple of thoughts there. In our early elementary grades, those come out through our civics and history benchmarks.
Okay.
And so students are given specific individuals, specific symbols to learn about. So because a symbol is abstract thinking, it's something replacing something else that's not currently in front of me. In the earlier grades, in some cases, it's introducing them to these symbols and helping them understand what the symbol represents or how a symbol even works. I do have a lesson that I created for third grade civics that uses the monuments in the National Mall, but is coming from our benchmark. So in our benchmark in particular, it lists out several monuments. So Mount Rushmore is one of them.
Okay.
And so we have the conversation of why those presidents. So in that particular lesson, the students are looking at the historical monuments, how they're built, how they're designed, and then they go and they read about early presidents. And the task then is for the students to create what could a monument for these other presidents look like. Does it look like Mount Rushmore? Does it look like the Washington Monument? Because they look very different. And so they get to have that thinking around what is the, not that there's a correct way to have a monument be designed, but it gives them that creativity to think about what are other ways monuments could look. And there are all kinds of, when I was creating that, I was borrowing from the Smithsonian, and I was borrowing from even Crayola, believe it or not, has online lesson plans. And one of them is for students to create a monument using recyclable materials and, of course, Crayola crayons. But the students are choosing what it looks like, what it's made out of, and then what goes on it. So are there going to be words on it, or is it going to be imagery? But again, that all then boils down to interpretation. So after students have learned about something, they are deciding what were the things that are going to be worth memorializing.
Okay.
In upper grades, in middle school, we dive into these topics even deeper. So in middle school, we have lessons, activities where students are looking at, I'm thinking in particular in our U.S. history benchmarks, students are looking at memorials across the country at different time periods and for different topics. So for example, one of them, when we're learning about westward expansion, the students are taking a look at the This Is the Place monument in Utah, which was created by the Mormons after they had founded Salt Lake City, and we're thinking back to their origin story and chose to memorialize that in that particular monument. So we can look at some monuments and see not just what were things that happened to this group of people, but then be able to ask the questions why those things made it into the monument and perhaps others were not added to the monument. So again, it gives room for that space for understanding interpretation and how people interpret the history that they're learning or that they're living differently.
Okay.
In terms of the National Mall, you have those different monuments there as well for 3 different presidents that are from different time periods, 2 of them closely related, one further out. But they also then, we have conversations in middle school in our civics class with those monuments, because those monuments are designed after ancient ways of architecture, building architecture. So with the Washington Monument, you have an obelisk, which we track back to ancient Egypt, and in some cases even further back, which can be talked about in our world history classroom.
Oh, yeah.
Our Jefferson and Lincoln memorials are more closely resembling ancient Greece and Rome, that neoclassical architecture, which we see throughout many government buildings across our country. But so in our civics class, we're able to tie to those ancient societies, Greece for its democratic roots in Athens and Rome for its republican period of its ancient history, to tie then to, not just were our founding fathers looking at those ancient forms of government when they were trying to determine what we have today, we can even see in the style of architecture that they were choosing to highlight and choosing to build, we see those antecedents as well.
Well, always a pleasure to have you on. I definitely love all of those ideas. I hadn't even thought about the way that you could literally even connect this to world history too. So definitely cool. See, that's why I keep you around. That's why I keep you around.
Sometimes I have good ideas.
All right, well, that wraps up this episode of Resting Places, Learning Spaces. We explored the National Mall and were reminded that it's more than a collection of monuments, but a space that spans America's ever-changing history. As educators, we have the opportunity to use it as a tool for deeper learning, helping students engage with the past in ways that feel relevant to their lives today. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to share it with your fellow educators, travelers, or anyone interested in the intersection of history and place. You can also follow me on Instagram at Professor Van Dyke to continue the conversation or recommend a topic. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and remember, every resting place has a story to